Good day once again. When I met you last time, we looked at the brain. Today, we're going to be looking at the neurons, the nerve cells. Okay? Because we need this when we're talking about a reflex action. So if you look at this first diagram and concentrate on this diagram, this shows you a motor neuron. So basically, we'll be looking at the structure of a motor neuron and a sensory neuron. Okay? Now, a neuron is a nerve cell. So it has got all the components of a cell, but a neuron is a very specialized cell. So it's got two basic parts. It's got a part which contains a nucleus called the cell body, and it's got fibers extending from it, nerve fibers. So if you look at this neuron, the motor neuron, this is its cell body, a star-shaped structure. Okay? And how do I know it's a cell body? It's got a nucleus. So this label here would be cell body. This is nucleus. F would be cytoplasm because it is a nerve cell. Now it's got fibers extending from it. So it's got these short fibers here, and extending this way, it's got one long fiber. So it's got many short fibers directly extending from it, and it's got one long nerve fiber directly extending from it. Now, the fibers are either dendrites or axons. The easy way to remember, dendrite has got a T, so T stands for to or towards. So dendrites carry the impulse towards the cell body. Axon has got an A, carries the impulse away from the cell body. Good? So if this is my cell body, these are my dendrites, shorty dendrites. And this one, long one here, would be the axon. Look at how many labels we know so far. 5. You must know a minimum of 5 labels just to be on the safe side. Okay? Notice this axon is covered. It's got a covering. And that covering is D, called the myelin sheath. Very important, my darlings, because it speeds up the transmission of the impulse. Remember, impulses must be carried very fast to prevent damage. So it speeds up the transmission of the impulses by providing electrical insulation. And people who suffer from multiple sclerosis, sadly, have their myelin sheath broken down by their own bodies, sadly. And if the myelin sheath is broken down, then the impulses will travel very slowly, and impulses will reach the effector very slowly. And thus the reaction will take place very slowly. So they'll be very slow to respond. Oh, I use the word effector. What is an effector? An effector is an organ which finally receives this message, remembering the message is the impulse. So here, the effector would receive the message and then provide an appropriate response. So this axon has these axon terminals, the end of the axon, which will either end in a muscle or a gland. If it ends in a muscle, then the muscle will contract, just in case you put your hand on a hot plate, And so the message will come back to the muscles of your hand, causing your muscles to contract, moving your hand away to prevent you from being burnt. But if the impulse goes to a gland, then the gland will release a secretion. So these two organs, muscles or glands, are known as effector organs, and they will effect a response eventually. So that is your motor neuron. One more thing that is not shown here, my darlings, are little dots that you'll sometimes see around here, and those are Nissl granules. They produce the chemical substance which allow impulses to travel. So label F is not Nissl granules because it's just pointing to the fluid, so it's cytoplasm. Inside the cytoplasm, you'll find your Nissl granules, as you'll see in this next diagram that I'm about to show you. So the next diagram is your sensory neuron. Now this is a smaller version of that motor neuron I showed you just now. So there's your cell body at one end with this guy, or sensory neuron. The cell body is in the center. This one has got many short dendrites. Now with this one, you need to know the direction of the impulse to know which is the dendrite and which is the axon. Because if you look here, extending from the cell body, there's a long fiber here. There's also a long fiber there. So how are you going to know which is the axon, which is the dendrite? So you need to know which is the direction of the impulse. Once you get more knowledge in this particular diagram, you would know that the impulse is traveling. Let me show you one more time, babies, using this. So in this particular case, the impulse will be traveling upwards. Sorry about that. So if the impulse is traveling upwards, my darlings, that means this one will be the dendrite carrying the impulse towards the cell body, and this one would be the axon carrying the impulse away. So we know dendrite of the sensory neuron, axon of the sensory neuron, cell body of the sensory neuron, nucleus of the sensory neuron, and you can put your myelin sheath even clearer over there, and that would be the myelin sheath. We know our labels. Now notice this is our sensory neuron. Will meet up with the next neuron. This neuron will meet up with the next. And there's no touching. There's a gap between one neuron and the next. So that's what we're going to be looking at in the next particular session, where we're going to be looking at a reflex arc, because this shows the reflex arc. But before I go there, let's go back to these questions, my dear children, and look at some of these answers that you could have put in for the questions, to the left. So name the type of neuron here, motor neuron. How do you know it was a star-shaped cell body? But generally they don't accept star-shaped cell bodies, so you would have said many short dendrites. Or the cell body is at the end of the neuron. Identify B, F, and A. We've done that already. B, your nucleus. F, your cytoplasm. A, your dendrite. Give the letter and name. So always write the letter first and then your name. Give the letter and name of the part that transmits the impulse away from the cell body. How did I teach you to remember that? A for away. It'll be C, the axon. Let me just take out this distracting thing here, dolls. Okay. And then, very importantly, let's look at the next one while I'm trying to get this in order. Let's look at the next part. The name and letter of the part that insulates and speeds up the transmission of impulses, of course, it's D, the myelin sheath. Name the condition caused by the progressive degradation of part D, and of course that would be your multiple sclerosis. So when I see you next, I'll be showing you the spinal cord, and then we will see how the neurons work together to bring about a reflex action. So good. You should be reading about these until I see you at the next.